So while you have science, and then Barry will bring science, I'm not science. I'm kind of a comic book version of soil health. To be honest, I'm not a scientist. I'm more of a political scientist. So just kind of bear with me, but I do want to talk about the importance of this whole conference. Super impressed. Been here all day really learning about what you guys are up to. Know that you guys are on the leading, bleeding edge of this topic. I'm really proud of my tenure and having worked with NRCS for many years. Very proud of my partnership with NRCS, but also very cognizant of the limitations of the public sector. So let me just start kind of big picture, high level kind of overview, flyover here. So in the soil health, and I'll say soil health movement really started post-Dust Bowl, right, 1935, after Black Sunday. The soil health movement has been existent ever since over those last 85 years. And in the public, so it's an investment from extension, from land-grant universities, from private researchers, also from public agencies, the Bureau of the Soils, which became the Soil Conservation Service, which became the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Soil and water conservation districts are all part of the soil health continuum that has been existent since 1935, 2 days after Black Sunday. When I travel all over the country, both my prior job with NRCS, but also now with Land O'Lakes, the farmer co-op, which I'll talk about a little bit later, it's still the enormity of the job yet to be done just overwhelms me. And the public has invested mightily and has carried us far. And producers have done tremendous innovation and have adopted a lot of great practices to advance their stewardship of the soils. And yet, we still have incredible erosion rates across this country. So the last NRI, I think the last NRI estimate, the 2012 NRI, National Resources Inventory estimated the average erosion rate, including both sheet and rill and wind erosion, was about 5.2 tons per acre per year. You have regions of the U.S., though, where it's double, 3x, 2x to 3x that. So that's not sustainable. So I left my tenure with USDA really still very much passionate about and caring about this topic of how we ensure the long-term productivity and profitability of our natural resource ecosystem, our agricultural lands. And this is where, really the title of my talk here is about how do we get the private sector, production agriculture, working in partnership now with the public sector. And this is not to supplant or to replace or duplicate, it's to complement and amplify and accelerate. And there are things that the research community can do, that NRCS and soil water districts can do, that the private sector will never, ever be able to do. And then there are things, frankly, that the private sector and production agriculture can do, which land grants and NRCS and soil water districts can never do. And how do we get a quorum of cooperation between the public and the private and build some micro-rosile stuff connecting the public and the private to better complement and ultimately provide better services for producers? All right. So in the private sector, so I work for Land O'Lakes now. Land O'Lakes is a branded food company. You guys all know about our butter, but we're also the third largest farmer co-op in the country. And I'll talk a little bit about our journey and why we're interested in this topic of sustainability. And so during the next few minutes, I want to talk about from what's happening around us in the agricultural space, but really the food space. And there's an increasing trend in interest from consumers, from the public, from policymakers, and ultimately from food companies, the whole food supply chain, that is now very busily at work defining what is sustainable. And so I'm both like kind of a voice from the future, but also a voice from the current. We collectively as agriculture need to engage and define for ourselves what is sustainable agriculture, or it will be defined for you. And what marketers and companies and other entities will do to the topic of sustainability will be to what they've done to other types of forms of agriculture, and particularly around technology. So we have a window of opportunity here to define for ourselves what is sustainable agricultural, sustainable production, and lean into it and own it, or we can lean back and go in the defensive crouch and it will be then defined for you, which is not ultimately a good thing. So why is it here to stay? So number one, and I'll talk about this, is that this is a policy issue being driven by concerns from the public and from media. And this isn't just a one-party issue. This is a state, federal, local issue. This is not, it's not partisan. This is nonpartisan. But beyond that, this is about also now the marketplace responding to both the policy as well as the consumer interests. So you're seeing alignment now occurring within the whole value supply chain. There was an announcement, Dave Brandt, I was talking with him last night, a very exciting announcement, for example, with General Mills. General Mills, a leader in this topic of regenerative agriculture, making an investment to help advance soil health conservation, soil health stewardship with growers in the United States and in Canada. But ultimately, it's because consumers then are shifting their buying preferences. So the ship is turning, and again, we can either lean back or we can lean in. And if we lean in, it'll be a much better future for agriculture. So this is an example of what happens when we lean back. So this is an actual op-ed piece that showed up in the New York Times recently. First thought is that guy in the combine did not have auto steer on. He was consuming rye, but in liquid form. A different kind of cocktail. Did not have auto steer engaged on that day. But when the topic, the lead in, so all this concern about a changing climate and severe weather, and the number one topic that this author writing in is, we need to rethink farming. It's like, pump the brakes, full stop, uh-oh. When the New York Times is coming up with pro tips on how you guys should farm, you should be very concerned, right? This is not a good day. But beyond that, it's a lot about then how do we engage nature to help, which is always a good thing, to Christine's point. When you farm in partnership with nature, in concert, move the direction she wants to move, you're going to use a lot less energy, a lot less labor and time, a lot less cost, which will be much more beneficial. But the lead in here is that when the public and the media think about how we can farm better, but they don't necessarily know how to farm, that's not such a good thing. So, but beyond, it's the Lake Erie issues, and it's other things where it's constantly now where consumers are being kind of pinged with these one-offs, where there's examples where systems are out of balance. And where things are out of balance, then policymakers get involved. So where I now reside in Minnesota, the state of Minnesota now has a buffer law. So if you are farming next to, your field is next to a public water or ditch that flows to a public water, mandatory 50-foot buffer on every edge of the field, even if you have a negative slope. So that's not such a good thing for production agriculture, because a lot of guys are taking thousands of acres of productive land out of production and putting it into buffer strips. There's also a new nitrate law that goes into effect in the state later this year. Or in Wisconsin, right now, last year, the state of Wisconsin now promulgated regs on manure management, particularly on karst systems, about how they can manage manure, which is a huge issue and a cost concern for dairying. Here in Ohio, in 2016, the city of Columbus, a city of 1 million people, had a do not drink order for municipal water users in the city because of high nitrate levels in the city water supply. Or out in Washington State, again in dairy country, where you had one bad actor who was not managing a manure lagoon. He was losing 6 million gallons a year of liquid manure into the aquifer. Not a good day for the aquifer, right? Bad deal. And now 15 years later, the community is still sharpening their saw and really torqued about dairying and put a really bad eye, a black eye, for agriculture writ large in the Yakima Valley in Washington State. Or, of course, the seminal example right in Iowa with the Des Moines Water Works lawsuit, which has been resolved for the time being, but unless there's a change, again, I submit it's probably not resolved. So you have this cocktail of all this constant concern coming into the media, and so what do policymakers do? So like obviously we're here in Ohio, the Kasich administration kind of ended out their tenure doing what? Right? Regulating agriculture. And it's not just though in Ohio, it's out in California, where if you're concerned about agriculture and regulation, previous administration had a lot of regulations in place, this case on methane emissions out of livestock operations, which is a huge deal for dairying in the Central Valley of California. So beyond these policy changes, putting pressure on, the spotlight on agriculture, you now have increasingly consumers are getting engaged in what is what is it that they're buying, what are the products on the store shelves, and where do I put my marginal dollar when I go to the grocery store. And so there's a lot of these notions out there, and this is, I apologize, it's kind of hard to read from the back of the room. So there's sort of 4 myths about this whole topic about consumers in the marketplace. And the first is that, well, first, it's only a minority of the population. So it's only a few subset of folks that are really interested in this topic of sustainable production. And this is an emerging trend. So they, folks went out a couple years back and did a survey, and they surveyed folks on the coasts, or in this case, across the whole United States, across different regions. And it turns out about 51% of the population said, no, actually I'm really interested in how my food is produced and how it's grown. So I'm interested in the environmental impact of my food buying choices. Well, okay, then it's just where I'm from, home state of California, it's just the folks that like to drink the wheatgrass juice and sample different hemp products. Well, no, it's actually across all different regions of the country, right? It's not just, it's in the West Coast, it's in the Northeast, and the Southeast, it's the Midwest. Again, it splits down the middle. About 50% of the consumers are interested in how their food is produced. Well, it's just the young folks, the millennials and the Generation Z. No, it's actually across all different age categories here. From the boomers through Gen X, through millennials and younger, about 50% plus are interested in how their food is produced. Well, then it's just folks that can afford Whole Foods and they have a big paycheck. No, it's across all income categories. So across all different income, socioeconomic, regional, age, there's an interest increasingly about from consumers what they're putting in their bodies, what they're feeding their children, what they're feeding their parents, but also about their buying preferences. And that those impacts, when they make a choice, when they go to the store or they purchase a product, what ultimately is that impact to my community, to the water supply, et cetera. So what do companies do? So companies then are starting to align. They see where the puck is going, and they want to be there to meet where that future buying dollar is going. So they are starting to present themselves as quote-unquote sustainable. So companies that have sustainable labels or they advertise and market themselves as sustainable, this is a change in overall across different sustainable products on the store shelves between 2014 and 2017. You're seeing a growing share. That top blue bar is what are sustainable products. And the middle bar is other transparent label products. So think gluten-free, organic, non-GMO, things that purportedly share additional information to the consumer. You're seeing between these two product categories, again, a growing market share, which is not an accident. It's in part these companies are putting a lot of marketing dollars behind these different products. So from a Land O'Lakes perspective, this is just our sustainability journey. So these are companies that then, we are a dairy co-op. We have 2,000 dairy members. We have a responsibility then to market and get best economic value for their product, their milk. These are our customers that we then sell to. And you can see that stair-step journey across from the lower bottom there. These are companies that are asking exploratory questions around how is your milk produced? What are the different management options your dairy producers use? Are you tracking your overall energy usage and water usage? To at the other end of the scale, you have very formal programs like Nestle and Unilever, where it's bare-knuckled. If you don't participate and you don't give us your sustainability data that we want, we don't take your milk. So it's not a premium, it's about market access. And particularly in the current dairy environment, that is like bare-knuckle. So this is where Land O'Lakes has then had to lean in and invest in having our own dairy sustainability program that we then go and offer as a service to our members, as a voluntary service, to help consult with them to look at their manure management, to look at their energy usage, their water usage, and increasingly we want to now get into their silage acres, their pasture acres, their manure management, to really offer them a holistic service to help them not just answer these questions, but hopefully add value back into that dairy operation. We also then, we're very proud, we have a partnership with Campbell's Soup Company, where Campbell's is interested in sourcing wheat for their Pepperidge Farm products. They own Pepperidge Farm crackers. And we had a little pilot project in the Chesapeake Bay region out on the East Coast in Maryland, Pennsylvania. We're now expanding that here into Ohio. Heritage CoOp, we're very proud, is one of our federated co-op members and owners. They're going to be one of the leaders in this expanding pilot project, where Campbell's wants to understand how their wheat is produced, that they mill, that goes into the food products. They think, ultimately, they want to present to that changing consumer preference base how their products are healthy and nutritious, but also doing right by the environment. And they want to partner with a co-op and their own owners to help source and produce that wheat. So that then gets to Land O'Lakes. Why Land O'Lakes? So this is where I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about from the private sector, how the private sector can complement the public sector. So Land O'Lakes is a 98-year-old farmer co-op. We started in St. Paul, Minnesota about 98 years ago as a creamery. And today we've grown substantially. So we're the third largest co-op in the United States. We have around 2,000 dairy members in our system, about 1,000, a little over, almost 900 row crop members. And then we have a federated system of 1,100 local regional co-ops as well as independent ag retailers that are member owners of the Land O'Lakes enterprise. So why is that significant? Well, you look across that whole enterprise, the whole membership base and that federated system of different regional local co-ops and retailers, that system touches 25% of all the crop farmers in the United States. 30% of all protein consumed in the United States is somehow touched by the Land O'Lakes Inc. system. 50% of all the harvested grain in the United States, again, is touched by the Land O'Lakes co-op system. And ultimately, 90% of all grocery store chains have a Land O'Lakes product or a product on the store shelf that has been touched by the Land O'Lakes co-op system. So for the board, our farmer owners thought they see where this is going. And they've seen the investment from the public sector, and they understand we've got huge challenges. And that the agriculture is doing what it does best, which is, first of all, not talk about itself. It's heads down, it's busy doing its job, growing, producing, but not necessarily leaning in and trying to own this discussion, or at least participate, but not, beyond talking, actually contributing to some results. And so that's when the co-op decided we're going to invest in a little business unit they call Land O'Lakes Sustain. That's where I work. We are a tiny team. We are like a krill shrimp in a pot of blue whales. There are like 12 of us in a company of 10,000. And our job is to think outside the box and to really be the change engines within this corporation, within this co-op. But really, most fundamentally, is to work with that network of federated local co-ops, regional co-ops, and those ag retailers. And so we've built out, over the last couple of years, so far a network of 25 ag retailers in the US and Canada, where they're interested in this whole topic of soil health. They want to begin the journey. They want to have a better offer to their own member owners and to their farmer customers around soil stewardship, around nutrient management, around irrigation water management, all the things that are part and core and part and parcel of a soil health management system. To be clear, they do not want to become USDA service centers. They're never going to become an NRCS field agent. They're never going to replace the Soil and Water Conservation District. But these are co-ops that are very sophisticated with precision ag, have very advanced nutrient management capabilities, have an array of tools in the tool chest, which can really help advance this whole topic on nutrient management and soil conservation. And really importantly, they have folks that call on farmers every single day. So I was having a conversation with Mark, former colleague, Mark from NRCS, and how just here in Ohio, how NRCS has attrited and lost a lot of its workforce. That's in every state in the union. I travel. It's very depressing for me. NRCS is 30–40% vacant from where it was just 2 years ago. I mean, they've hemorrhaged a massive amount of capacity and expertise. So how do we then engage and bring into this conversation folks that have capacity and expertise and know-how? So we are really passionate that this concept on stewardship, and stewardship is really, defining that is important to me. It's about agronomy, field operations, and traditional conservation, that this has to be a farmer-owned, farmer-led conversation. We can't let necessarily the food companies define this for you all and for us. This is something that agriculture needs to really lean in and own. And the way we define sustainability is, number one, it's of course about protecting the quality and the health of the natural resource base. But really fundamentally, what seemingly always gets lost in the discussion is, number two, just as importantly, it has to be about the long-term economic profitability and success of the family farming operation. So we have a statistic on there that only 39% of consumers say they understand sustainability. I think that is about 10 times too high. Case in point, an anecdote, we had a little event that Barry was at last year. We had a kind of a celebration event where we recognized some of the best conservationists, stewards in our system, some farmers. We get them together, and we actually invited in a local consumer food panel. So these are local consumers that came in from the local area, and they didn't know anything about agriculture, and they had a professional moderator. And the moderator led through a whole discussion about, well, they brought them out on the stage, and I think they had somehow anesthetized the farmers in the room. The farmers were very well behaved and didn't go after the consumers. So they started out the conversation with, so is sustainability really important to you? Oh, yeah, it's absolutely really important. Great. What's sustainability? Their eyes like saucer plates. They're like, well, I don't actually know how to define that. And within a minute, the conversation switched to GMO and organics. It just went right into that ditch. And they started to use verbs. They didn't know what they're talking about. How GMOs were about injecting stuff into their food. And it's like, oh my God, what are you talking about? So it was a long conversation. It was fascinating, including they had questions about, well, have you ever been on a farm? And one guy's, oh, yeah, great. Well, what do you know about farming? He's like, oh, well, I was up in Pennsylvania recently, and we drove by some Amish farms. It was great. They're out there in their buggies. It was like, great, okay. That's very interesting. Another one was like, great, yes, I've been on a farm. Great. Where was it? It was Central Florida, and it was a happy farm. Well, why was it a happy farm? I said, well, it had some chickens, and it had an outhouse. Like, okay. Okay, let's stop. Let's pump the brakes. Let's shut this down right here. All right, so we are then building a partnership, really diverse partnership then with different companies that are trying to align around this space about how do we bring through the ag retailer system a robust, in this case, our own ecosystem, reaching quorum of diverse skill sets and capabilities and technology and equipment and know-how and field capacity to bring results to ultimately the farmer customers. So it includes USDA NRCS, it includes land grants, it includes nonprofit organizations like the Nature Conservancy and the Environmental Defense Fund. It includes grocery retailers like Walmart, as well as food companies like Campbell's Food Company, ingredient manufacturers like Tate & Lyle, as well as other companies like Lacrosse Seed, which is, I was talking to Barry last night about Lacrosse Seed and their capabilities around the whole topic on cover crop seed, as well as the management, the agronomy of cover crops and how to effectively incorporate it into your system. So I wanted to share with you then, what is then the private sector approach to how do we scale this? And this is what's really confounded me. So you go to a conference like this and you meet the top cream of the top 1%, the top half of 1% of the leading growers who are doing some really innovative stuff. But also the top researchers, the top conservationists. How do we widen this? How do we expand this, right? How do we get not just hundreds of thousands of acres involved, not just millions of acres involved, tens of millions of acres, hundreds of millions of acres in this conversation with, if anything, fewer people, right? How do we scale this in a way that works for agriculture, for growers, but ultimately that does the right thing by the environment? So one approach we're taking, I'm not saying this is the approach, this is an example I want to share with you. So kind of fasten your seatbelts. It's going to get kind of wonky and technical here. I'm going to try and behave, but I'm going to take you through. So we have rolled out in January, effectively this year, a new tool which takes a lot of the great information that the public has built. So this is NRCS soils information, NRCS ARS, different algorithms and calculators. We're trying to put this then in a platform that helps farmers identify, where do I start on my soil conservation journey? We don't say soil health, because I knew you guys would jump me and tear me up. So we say soil quality. We'll eventually hopefully get to the biological components here. So what are the core attributes that I think are really important to put in the hands of a grower, but also or into the hands of a crop consultant or into a sales agronomist or into a conservation advisor? And I think back to my time at NRCS and what I wished at the time NRCS had at its disposal. I know you guys are hard at work. You have a new platform coming out called CART. What are some tools that would be really effective here? So number one, the biggest gap I felt was that NRCS and maybe districts, I don't want to get in trouble with the district folks in the room, but really lack the ability to effectively talk about economics. And if you can't start the conversation or end the conversation, at any point in the conversation, have a conversation with the grower about what's the profitability impact of a change in practice or change in management, you've lost, at a minimum, you've lost the opportunity. Probably lost the sale in this in terms of conversation. And listening to Dave, you earlier, again, you always weave the economics, the profitability into your journey, but then also into the why. This isn't just a feel-good. This isn't a good thing for Mother Earth and the whole, that enterprise, which is great, but it really anchors it in where it has to be. We're a business enterprise. A farmer is a business owner. It has to be profitable and successful. It's also then about taking what agriculture has done so well for the last 20 plus years around geospatial awareness, particularly at a subfield scale. We really need to advance conservation, stewardship, soil health beyond at a farm scale, at a watershed scale. It has to be at a subfield scale. And it's the old 80-20 rule, applies to everything. It particularly applies in this case. In this case, it's even more exacerbated. In this case, 80% of the loss, whether your topsoil or your nutrients, is generally in a watershed scale occurring with it on the 20% of the acres. It's either more exacerbated here in the Maumee River Basin. So the Maumee River watershed that flows to Lake Erie, according to NRCS, 70% of the sediment that ends up in Lake Erie carrying the particulates of phosphorus, but also the sediment itself, which is a navigational issue and water quality impact, comes off just 4% of the acres. So in a watershed of what, like 12 million acres in size? 4% of the acres, not 4% of the farms, not 4% of the fields. It's just 4% of the acres sprinkled across an entire massive watershed. Say, for sake of argument, say it's 10 million acres of row crop. How do you find those 4% of the acres? And I submit they're probably in every single field. It's based on aspect and slope and soil type and management, proximity to water. Very complex. So let's use technology to find where those things are and help the grower, tie that down and reduce that loss. Ultimately, given back in real time a sense of impacts across large operations with multiple fields. It feels good to talk about soil health, but because each field has its own unique signature, its own unique needs, okay, where do I really start? What does this unique field need in terms of a management switch? Or which fields out of my 40 fields I manage, which are the 5 that are trending negatively for soil carbon or for erosion or for nutrient loss? Okay. So if distill it all down, it's showing, first of all, to the grower what's the value of different stewardship practices. 2, it leverages the agronomic expertise of the crop consultant or the retailer to weave stewardship into their experience, their consultation, their support for their farmer customers. And we're trying to show for the farmer at a field scale what's the real value from a pocketbook standpoint, but also from a natural resource-based value standpoint. And really what we're trying to get to is, right, this is the common picture. Everyone knows what's happening in this field. It's trying to transform this from being a conversation around conservation really into what's happening in this field, which is you're losing profitability. You're losing production capacity. You're losing your valuable inputs. And all of this is going down the Wabash to the Ohio to the Mississippi to the Gulf, right? So this is the first stop in the journey. Super wonky. I'm not going to get very detailed here. There are 2 primary things we do with the tool. The first is we give the grower a stewardship score, an insight score we call it, and it's a way to quantify which traditionally has been qualitative. Where are you on your stewardship journey? More importantly, where does this field is on the stewardship journey? So there's a lot of focus and investment in training on the 4 R's, right? On nutrient management, on investment in talking about soil health. We're trying to then plant the flag and say, actually, we want to give you a benchmark. Then you can compare across all your fields where this field is at, and you can track change over time. You can benchmark your operation against other growers in the county, in the watershed, in the state. So let me talk about what's going on here. So first, we have the score from 0 to 100. We have a categorization here from basic to moderate to high to advanced. This characterizes your overall stewardship. Within that stewardship, we have 3 categories. We look at management stewardship, which is your field operations. Second, we look at a thing called soil and nutrient loss mitigation. So this is your risk of loss of both soil and nutrients in that field. We're going to characterize how well you're mitigating that risk inherent to that particular field. And we're looking at traditional conservation adoption, how well you're protecting soil and water air resources. So then on the right, there's this stewardship report card where it takes those 3 categories and distills it down and breaks it down so you can visually just see where is this field at across those 3 categories. So for management stewardship, we look at nutrient, pest, soil, and irrigation management. So it allows you to drill in and look at, okay, where are my, beyond my 4 R's, great, which R are you using? We're actually trying to then incorporate the 4 R's into this from basic to advanced journey to show it allowed to solicit and begin a conversation about how to enhance that. For soil and nutrient loss mitigation, we're looking at, before you touch that field with a seed or an implement, what's the inherent risk of loss from that field? So we're running different NRCS risk indices around soil runoff, leaching risk. We look at wind erosion risk and then proximity to water. So the closer that field is to open water, the greater the risk, right? This is the equalizer. So if you're on 0.5 degree slope with 2 feet of topsoil a mile from the river, I'm not really losing sleep at night about runoff from that field. If you're on 15 degree slope, highly erosive soils, tends to below, right next to a river, we should probably expect there to be a little more conservation in place to protect those natural resources, but also to protect the broader public resources. And then the bottom, we look at soil, water, air, and also a systems adoption. What's the multi-layered defense in place to avoid the loss of topsoil and soil organic matter and nutrients? To the extent that loss occurs because of a strong storm event, you're controlling the flow of that water through your system, subsurface or surface flow. And before that surface flow or subsurface leaves your field, how well are you trapping it? Cleaning that water before it leaves the system. So it's an avoid, control, trap methodology. And then we look in the bottom here, these 5 key stewardship indicators. So we look at nitrogen use efficiency in pounds per bushel. So we're trying to give some efficiency metric back to the grower. We look at sheet and rill erosion. what's the erosion that's occurring, water-induced. We look at overall wind erosion. We look at the soil conditioning index trend, which is your SEI score, which is a predictive estimate on what direction are you going in your soil organic matter and soil carbon, which is we've spent a lot of time today talking about. And then also your net greenhouse gas emissions. This is a field gate estimate of total CO2 release from the aeration and respiration from your soils, as well as NOx emissions released from your nitrogen fertilizer. So you can go in, and then you can click into these and see at a subfield scale. In this case, this is a view of what it looks like on nitrogen use efficiency. So you can click into those indicators to understand within your field, where do you have poor nitrogen use efficiency? Where do you have high rates of sheet and roll erosion or high rates of wind erosion? So it's intended to be a conversation starter to help guide where you want to change and switch out your management. This also unlocks the tool chest for the crop consultant, the agronomist, to have a conversation about different prescriptions or zone management or grid soil sampling or variable rate applications, variable rate seeding, variable rate cover crop application, right? Foliar applications, the whole toolbox to target and optimize the application of your seeds, your crop protection, and your nutrients to maximize production from this field and minimize loss and ultimately optimize profitability. You can also drill in and interact with this. In this case, we're going into the soil quality. You click it, drill down. In this case, you can do some scenario building. So this is a system, a field that was using a reduced till system. We now say you want to upgrade it to a strip till system and apply cover crops. Great. You can then simulate. When you run the simulator, you can see how then moving from a reduced till to a strip till system, applying cover crops, moves you up into the moderate category, moves your score up to a 42. But more importantly, you get the feedback then in these indicators. So in real time, the grower's getting feedback how you can cut your sheet and roll erosion by 2/3. You can eliminate your wind erosion. You can bury the needle, your SCI score into the green zone, really further accelerating your accruing of soil carbon and soil organic matter, and cut in half your net greenhouse gas emissions. We can also then have a conversation around profitability. So this is the other thing we do is profit insights, where we take that same information, and there's a lot going on here. So we provide two maps in this case of the field, a side-by-side comparison. This is a heat map. And Dave, this is kind of borrowing from Dave Brandt's playbook here. He showed this, what he did in his own operation. Same exact concept, where instead of yield, this is a heat map of profitability. So we build a very robust crop budget that's editable by the grower for he or she wants, that looks at all in. So it's land costs, insurance, labor, seed, chem, fertilizer, equipment usage, fuel, all in costs in that field. And from that, then we can generate using satellite imagery from the NDVI imagery, we can then generate where that field is losing money and where it's making money. And the hypothesis is where it's losing money, that's also where you're having the deleterious environmental impact. It's where you're losing your fertilizer, either at the tile line or in the atmosphere. It's where you're losing your topsoil, your organic matter. So in this case, this field under conventional management is estimated to be losing about $6 an acre, all in about $900. On the right then, the side-by-side comparison, we have a scenario where it takes the low ROI zone, the low return on investment zone, which is red, and rolls it into the conservation reserve program. So just by taking that one low profit zone out of production, putting it into CRP, what's the impact? From a profit standpoint, it swings that field profitability without changing anything else in the field, $6,000 to the positive. So it's putting a conversation starter about a different use for your land, but a better return for your pocketbook. But beyond pocketbooks, we can then do a side-by-side comparison in these fields in terms of stewardship. So under the conventional system, this is, you get your inside score, great. We've converted erosion, in this case, units, common unit, a dump truck. So you have, in this case, 27, almost 28 3-axle, 20-ton dump trucks driving out that field worth of erosion. You can see, because of overall the soils in this field in Iowa are pretty rich, you still have a pretty good soil condition index result. But in terms of net greenhouse gas emissions, this total CO2 equivalent emissions, it's about 17 passenger cars of annual emissions. By taking that low profit zone out of production, it's a sandy loam soil, drains very quickly, very porous. By taking that out and put it in CRP, you've enhanced your score. You've taken 13 dump trucks of erosion off that field. You've further advanced your soil carbon a little bit, smidge, but ultimately you've also taken the equivalent of one vehicle off that field in terms of emissions. Going to a different scenario. In this case, same center scenario here, right? That field under conventional management. What happens if we have a scenario called post-harvest winter cover, which is using enhanced nitrogen management. So you have split applications with additives and really trying to manage that nitrogen in season as opposed to doing a fall predominant application. You're also moving into a no-till system, so this is no-till, but also adding cover crops in the rotation. So in kind of reverse order, if you look at kind of these soil healthy metrics, I'm not going to say soil health, soil quality metrics, great, your score's now up in the advanced category, congratulations. In terms of erosion, you've eliminated erosion. You've armor plated that field, you're not experiencing wind or sheet and roll erosion. You've buried the needle in the soil carbon direction, which is very good for long-term productivity and resiliency and crop health. Because you have so much organic matter and biomass now in your system that you're not burning it off, you're storing that carbon in your soil, literally sucking it out of the atmosphere and storing it like a reservoir for the future, which is really good for all the attributes you guys are conversing in about water infiltration and plant health and water holding capacity and aggregate stability and tilth and structure. But we haven't fixed, in this case, the profitability proposition. And this is, I know where folks are going to get a little cranky with me, but this is just a single crop year proposition. This is not 3 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out. This is a one-year conversation. I know, Dave, you're looking at me all angry and mad. Where we haven't necessarily fixed the crop because it's an additional application, additional seed cost. We're being very conservative, so we're not changing yield. I know folks will argue, well, in some cases, and Dave, you said earlier, if you add rye to the system, you can guarantee on beans a 5 bushel yield bump. We held yield constant. In part, we feel that's the job of the agronomist, the consultant, to walk that through. We do not be presenting something that unless we really felt we could really stand behind. We didn't want to get in the middle of the agronomist and the crop consultant, the soil scientist, the conservationist, and the soil health division, and everyone else jumping on us saying, actually, there's a yield drag if you go to a no-till system, but you get a yield bump when you have cover crops. So we just held yield constant. So that's why we built then a database of, in this case, all the cost share opportunities. This comes back to that public partnership with NRCS, where it's not guaranteeing a contract, but it's showing to the grower, in this case, so for 19 states, we've built a database for all the environmental quality incentive program payments, as well as the conservation and stewardship program payments for 26 different practices. So in this case, in Iowa, what NRCS was paying for cover crop seed in applications in 2018 was, depending on the scenario, anywhere from $23 to $49 an acre out of EQIP. So it's about providing information to the grower. Were you aware that for pest protection, getting an IPM plan, a nutrient management plan, going into incentives for moving to strip till or no-till, getting cover crop help, there's a lot of assistance available, and then equipping that producer with the information that he or she needs to then go have a really good, targeted, focused, guided conversation with NRCS or the local SWCD office to have then a professional take it from there and really guide what's needed best in that field. So we can also then provide, getting even more precise, we can generate, in this case, these reports where we can do some scenario building. So this is at a crop field in central Iowa, where we have different management systems. So this is a corn bean rotation using fall till the corn stalks and a spring till the soybeans. So it's a very conventional tillage system. And we can create heat maps of where erosion is occurring. So it's running Russell, in essence, on either a 3x3 or 9x9 meter grid across the entire field. So you're getting a really precise estimate of where the sheet and roll erosion is occurring in that field. Interestingly, though, we can also then generate SCI scores. So across that field, where is that field particularly generating positive trends in soil carbon and soil organic matter accrual, but also where it's orange, where you're burning off out of your system, you're losing that organic matter. So it's showing the producer overall in this management scenario where you're losing your topsoil in this field, but also where you're losing your soil carbon. By moving into this case, again, same rotation on the crop, no-till corn and then fall-till the corn residue, you can see an advancement overall in reducing the hot zones of erosion and also hot zones of carbon loss, and moving into a no-till system across both the full rotation, where now, you're right, no erosion really occurring in the system at all, and very positive overall whole field soil carbon trends. We can generate then estimates of how much across these different management systems. So these are the 3 scenarios that we just walked through, and estimates on the 1-year and 10-year soil loss. So under a 1-year system, the field average is losing 6 tons per acre per year, but the top 20% of that field, where you have the most erosive soils, is losing upwards of 15 tons per acre per year under that management scenario. By going to a no-till system, you can overall get a whole field average about half a ton per acre per year, and still get overall in the top 20% most erodible acres, lock that down to less than about a ton per acre per year. 10-year soil loss, we then are looking at how many inches of topsoil are being lost. So over a 10-year time horizon, using a conventional system, you're going to lose about 0.4 inches, almost half an inch of the total topsoil just within a 10-year time period. And then also the economic insights. So when you get that erosion occurring, that erosion, of course, is carrying valuable inputs. In this case, your NPK. So again, in this top system, which is the conventional till system, we estimate conservatively that field is going to be losing about $2,000 worth of total inputs in terms of valuable macronutrients that your crops need. That's going to be lost and not available for plant growth and for yield. Rounding the corner, we can take all this information, field scale, and roll this up. So this is actual real live data out of Minnesota. We had one of our co-ops there this past summer in 2018, did a pilot test on this platform. And they enrolled about 129 growers on about 163,000 acres, predominantly corns and beans, a little bit of wheat in that rotation. And we can then start to characterize across that field, across their whole service area now, across all those growers, about 129 growers, what is their adoption of different practices? First, on field management. So you can see the rotation is predominantly a corn-bean rotation. There's a little bit of monoculture there in the gray. About 5% of those fields are corn on corn. You can see cover crop adoption. We have some work to do. Where less than 1%, less than half of 1%, we're using cover crops in their sales territory. In terms of tillage intensity, you can see across, moving from conventional to no-till, where the journey is in south-central Minnesota in terms of improving overall residue management and hopefully reducing the intensity of tillage. In terms of nutrient management, again, the 4R methodology, there's a lot of information we can roll up to help this retailer better tell their story, but also help them really focus and guide their sales opportunities and partnership opportunities with NRCS and districts. So we could talk about how many of those producers in those acres are using a nutrient model to guide in-season applications, or how many are using variable rate applications for their fertilizers, or overall, how many are using in-season sampling methodologies like tissue sampling or soil nitrate tests. How many acres have a nutrient management plan? A little bit of work to do. As well as with fertilizer management. So how many are using, across those acres, are using split application methodology to apply the nitrogen and phosphorus? Or when they apply those macronutrients, are using a stabilizer to hopefully reduce the risk of loss to the environment. And then characterizing the placement methodology for both manure and commercial. So I'll close with this. This was an example of how one private enterprise, in this case a farmer-owned co-op, is trying to get engaged and partner with the public sector, but to bring resources and capabilities to the table through the retailer system. Ultimately, we hope for the benefit to scale this beyond just hundreds of thousands of acres, but onto tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of acres. Ultimately, these are examples of the kind of tools we want to put in the hands of growers to get beyond just the crop nutrient discussion and fertilizer application discussion and start to think holistically about whole field management, about full rotation management, about really effective soil management. We're not yet in the soil health space. In part, that's not our wheelhouse and expertise. It's being cognizant of that. But it's also trying to bring additional tools to the table that will complement a soil health management discussion and we hope will further accelerate and amplify what this whole conference is about. But in the end, it's where I started and where I think it's up to you guys to define. How do you define sustainability? I can talk to them blue in the face and trying to define it for you. We as an industry in agriculture can wait for it to be defined for us. We can wait for the New York Times and op-ed pieces on a Sunday to talk about how we should farm in the future. I don't think that's where we want to end up. And I think for not just for our own success, but for the long-term productive capacity and for the rural economic vibrancy of our communities, we owe it to ourselves and our families and those folks who will inherit our operations behind us to define what is ag sustainability. And I think anchoring it in soil health, and soil conservation is where we have the best opportunity for success long term.